Hello and welcome to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast with me, your host, Shiv Sengupta. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I'm the author of the Advaitaholics books, Sobering Insights for Spiritual Addicts, and a manifesto for spiritual anarchy, published by New Serum Press. They're available through Amazon in Kindle and paperback formats, and you can find them by clicking the links in the description below. Both these books have had a big impact and found great support among many veteran seekers for their willingness to critique spiritual culture, which, in my view, can act as a decoy designed to keep our vision perpetually focused away from what is most evident. Spirituality is a highly personal business. It is a person's unique relationship with reality. Yet the moment it is externalized and turned into a system of philosophy or thought, it ceases to be a personal affair. When it is made concrete for others to build a community and culture around, then the culture itself, rather than reality, gradually becomes the focal point. My writings have been controversial to say the least, with some calling them visionary, others calling them iconoclastic, and still others claiming they're anti-spiritual. But from my own perspective, I'm merely one person expressing an opinion. I don't claim to have some handle on the ultimate truth, and there are those who will resonate with my opinions and those who don't. However, my purpose with the Spiritually Incorrect podcast series is to connect and engage with other writers, thinkers, and spiritual teachers in this industry who don't necessarily fall into nor subscribe to the traditional guru stereotype. The idea is to explore some of the topics I cover in my books beyond the realm of my own opinions on the matter. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome my next guest, whom some of you will be familiar with. Her essays and mind ticklers are hilarious and to the point. And I must confess that every once in a while, I go creeping on her Facebook profile when I'm in need of a good laugh. So welcome, Judy Cohen.
Thank you.
So, Judy, you and I, this is our first time meeting face to face, I believe. I feel
Yes.
like I already know you. we've talked
funny.
quite a bit back and forth, right? So why don't you, for viewers who might not be familiar with who you are, just give us a quick introduction.
Okay, I was afraid you were going to ask me for that. Because, how do you sum up anything into a handful of words? I will say that while you were giving your introduction about yourself, I made a couple of notes because I got a kick out of a few things. And so I can relate to the idea of anarchy from a spiritual point of view. And I'm a non-traditionalist. I not only don't think, I'm pretty darn sure that I don't fit a whole lot of traditional boxes. I haven't studied the traditional stuff. I haven't been blessed by some hierarchy of designated approvers for a point of view. I've just had a life and come to see some things for myself. And I think possibly in some different ways, I have arrived at things in some different ways because the input for me was different. A while ago, I think it's Jody Radzik, and I hope I pronounce his last name right, the Guru Filiak, he had posted a little game on Twitter without saying a word, post a book that's had a lot of impact, and people were posting all these spiritual type books. And I posted a book called Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain, which was a formative book when I was much, much younger, using a different way of seeing and a different way of thinking to draw. And so the input that I've had has been different. And I think that has led me to conclusions that are not traditional when it comes to the spiritual world. One of the things that I have almost never done is answer the question when people ask me what my enlightenment experience was. I'm not telling. And partly because I don't see any value in talking about it. And I feel like it just strings people along. So I think that all of people's traditions, in terms of the studying they've done and the blessings from Papaji and etc., I think it ends up leaving people striving to have that experience or trying to figure out how to get that experience. And I'm just not, I don't want to lead people on like that. People need to find their own. So
that's a great point, because well, what is traditional about spirituality? Why should anything be traditional? There's nothing traditional about us as human beings.
Right.
You know, if we accept the fact that humans are unique creatures, well, then they shouldn't by nature be conforming to some model or standard.
And why would we want to, or want to have an experience that conforms to some model or standard? I mean, I get the dream of constant bliss. I get the appeal of that. And I get how people can start running around trying to figure out how they can get it for themselves. But they're not going to get anything by trying to imitate somebody else. I don't see how that would work. And so, you know, though the difference between the idea of an individual and an individual's experience and an individual's point of view contrasted with, oh, we are everything, all is one, all is, a whole experience, and there are no individuals, and etc. You know, how is one going to get you the other? If you try to, well, I'm babbling a lot already. We just started. If you try to enter to this experience of no self and enlightenment, etc., by imitating or experiencing what somebody else has gone through, it's like you're skipping a step almost. It's like you're skipping the value of this point of view and this iteration of consciousness or existence. It's like saying, this is worth nothing. Let me have Shivs. And I just don't think existence works that way. I think every single life form offers something. It's a snowflake. No other life can give us that or give anything else that. And so, yeah, obviously it's already obvious, I'm sure, that I'm not a traditionalist. I don't even see the value in it.
So why do you think, in your opinion, so many people are then drawn to this? They begin, many people I know, myself included, you know, it begins with this impulse that comes often out of nowhere, or often out of your own experience of suffering and all of that, this desire to explore life further, or my own experience, my own mind, my own being further, begins very spontaneously. But then somewhere along the way, there's almost this pull to, okay, well, other people seem to have been on this path for longer than I have. Why not see what they're doing about it? And, oh, wait, this guy seems like he's got it all figured out. He's done this for 50 years. He's teaching courses. There's people flocking.
He must know.
He must know. So what is it then, do you feel, about people? They're so ready to sort of sell their own process short and flock to somebody who seems to have the answers.
Well, I mean, obviously there are many answers to that, but I think I'm just laughing at you coughing a little because I've got the same thing going. It's so funny. Um, I think on some level, which is not, I'm not a big fan of that phrase, but I think on some level, we all feel that this is not what we are, and that this is inherently incomplete. And I think that we all feel, some more intensely than others, a pull, a yearning, a desire to be aware of or to connect with what we are. We don't have to connect with it. We're already connected with it. But I think there's a yearning to know it. And I think that that just pulls people, you know, we're all trying to get back to the garden. And I think that pull is strong. And so if there's a sense of incompleteness, which, my gosh, I mean, my daily work is working in sessions with people. And the idea that there's something wrong with me, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, some version of that is so pervasive. So people are feeling it. And if the idea is that you're not enough, which is true, this isn't enough. Of course we feel that. So if the idea is that I am incomplete and I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm inadequate, I'm insufficient, etc., I'm going to want to be affixed or attached or connected with people that seem to have it. And even just the connecting with them is an attempt to get back to the garden, I think, if I'm making any sense. So
no, you're making perfect sense. And so let me put you on the hot seat for a little bit here.
Sure.
And ask you, then, what would you say is the difference between somebody going to a guru, sitting in an ashram, you know, proposing to give them the answers of life, versus somebody coming to Judy and, you know, I'm trying to find myself? And what is Judy doing differently for this person than guru sitting in an ashram is?
I enter, first of all, I enter via the mind. I don't try to sidestep it or talk about it or say, no, put that aside. I enter right there through it, through the everyday crap of life. I'm not pretending you're supposed to be above it. Here it is. This sucks. I enter through that. And ideally, I help people find their own way. I'm not interested in a discussion. I'm not making any pronouncements. I'm not telling people how it is. I'm not telling people what they could have if only. I'm helping them find theirs. And
so would it be safe to say it's more akin to something like a counseling or therapy session, as opposed to imparting of knowledge and teaching you what life is all about?
it is certainly not the latter.
Okay.
I don't see it as a therapy session, although I think some people do, and I think it can look like that at first. In general, most people who come to me for sessions are hurting in some way. Even if the hurting is only, I'm not enlightened and I really want to be, it's still usually they want that because they're hurting. So there's no emphasis on the past. There's no discussion, very rarely, about why, why am I the way I am? I don't give a crap. Here it is. Now what? Which I think therapy is very involved with. And, but it does look different from your average Joe satsang, where people are talking about the heaven you can enter if only you do the right things. It looks like talking about everyday life. And through that, it kind of works backwards. As the everyday begins to be seen for what it is, things open up for people by themselves. I don't do it for them. I don't think that can be done. I think that's one reason so many people are seeking for decades and never attaining, because I don't think you can come at it head on.
Well, and that's part of the problem of putting person's attention on the past is then they always become future focused. The present gets lost.
Where is it? Yes. Yes.
So are you familiar with Gestalt therapy?
I mean, it's been a million years, but yes, if you quizzed me on it, I would certainly fail, but yes.
So Gestalt takes a kind of similar approach to what you're describing. Maybe not exactly the same, but it was sort of invented by this psychotherapist named Fritz Perls, many decades ago. Essentially, this form of therapy focuses on bringing the client right into what they're feeling in the present. Doesn't matter why, doesn't matter what happened in the past. Those are important, but not crucial. The main attention of the client is to consider what they're feeling and learn to work with those emotions, because those emotions are there for a reason. They're informing something, and understanding the language of what is happening in the present then allows the Gestalt clients to then be able to sort of move forward. Would you say that's something akin to what your sessions are like?
I totally get why you would think that. And I'm sure you will not be surprised to hear that even from a therapy point of view, I don't follow any rules. So I don't think it matters what a person feels. And I make that face because I know I'm about to take shit for that. I don't think it matters. I think feeling is a smokescreen. We get very obsessed with what I feel and what it means about me and what caused it and what do I do about it and how do I fix it so it never happens again. We get very involved in feeling, and I don't think it matters. So
that's interesting you say that, because from my perspective, when I look into the way I feel in certain circumstances, I don't look at it from the perspective it doesn't matter, but at the same time, I don't believe it is communicating what I think it's trying to. You know what I mean? Like, for example, if I'm feeling a burst of anger or if I'm feeling sad or whatever it might be, giving emotions too much importance seems to validate them as part of our identity. And I think that becomes the problem, is when we say, oh, I am my feelings, then there's no way to separate them, because your identity depends on those feelings perpetuating themselves.
Right.
On the other hand, they are useful indicators to pointing to something that may be going on in my system that otherwise I wouldn't be aware of. And so I use them as those sort of pointers. What would you say about that?
I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with it. But there's a kind of dissolving that happens, a dissolving of the importance of self. When I am not saying don't feel feelings, first of all, good luck with that. And I'm not saying that they are bad to feel. I'm just saying that they are not important. So let's say there's sadness here. Okay. What if that feeling has nothing to do with me? I mean, it's just a question. But what if there's a feeling of sadness, and what if it doesn't mean anything about me? It has nothing to do with me. Maybe it isn't even caused by me or something that happened to me. What if that feeling is like a leaf that has been blowing in the wind and landed on my roof for a while? Then you just let it be, and it depersonalizes it. And I think anything that depersonalizes helps the sense of self get a little wispier. It removes some of the person, the sense of person. And so this is just, I'm not saying this is the way. This is my way. Lots of people disagree with me most people disagree with me about this. So
it's actually an interesting point you bring up, because I think, there's a part of non-dual culture, which is essentially, I'm not saying you subscribe to that culture, but there's some commonalities there where this depersonalization is sort of the driving factor. And I think there's great benefits, because I think as a culture, we're way too invested, especially Western culture. We're way too invested in our emotions. Back in Asia, don't give a shit what you feel, get over it, move along. So there's this, don't spend so much time self-deprecating or self-managing, or you're not that important. This is a very Asian theme, right? You move over to the West and everybody's in therapy and everybody's like, how am I feeling today? That's a huge focus.
Oh my God.
So I understand the need to snap people out of that over addiction to what am I feeling. Having said that, do you feel like it could also be used as a spiritual bypassing technique when somebody's saying, oh, well, because that feeling is not me, I'm going to completely disconnect or disown it? Seems to me there's also value to understand maybe there's some belief system attached to what's bringing this feeling up over and over. And maybe there's some investigation of that belief structure that needs to be done.
So I have a couple of thoughts about that. First of all, it is inevitable when I talk to most Western spiritual people that when I say what you feel doesn't matter, the next word out of their face is bypass. I'm not sure what that means, actually, but I will say that I'm not saying ignore what happens. I'm saying, what if, I'm just asking, what if it doesn't matter? And again, I don't think people are successful at not feeling their feelings. Like if anxiety shows up, good luck trying to not feel it. I mean, if you figure out how to do that, you're going to be a very rich person. So I don't actually think that bypassing is as common as people claim. But when you say something like, I'm going to disconnect and disown this feeling, that sentence implies you have a great deal of power. I am going to disconnect from this feeling, as if existence has no say in what's happening. It's a point of view. I understand it's really different. And that I'm sure that you will have people listening to this later who are outraged by what I'm saying, no question. So just brace yourself, blame it all on me. But I don't think we have power over feeling, either to feel it or to disconnect from it or to bypass it in any way. I think feeling does what it wants. And
so first of all, I'm really happy you're bringing up stuff that we can back and forth about, because that's the point of these podcasts, is not to disagree. From my perspective, it's not so much that I choose to bypass. It's more, is bypassing happening, and am I aware of it? So a lot of the disowning happens unconsciously. I actually don't think people can consciously choose to disown an emotion. They can try and they can meditate. It might work for little brief patches of time. But one of the ways we sort of deal with trauma, especially from a young age, is we're taught we sort of learn that if we compartmentalize, we can keep ourselves safe. So there's a natural disowning that's part of that human psychology. I just realized I was on mute. And that plays into some of the social biases, social prejudices that we see around us, but whether they be racial biases or it might be gender biases, or it could be just biases of, I don't like certain kinds of work, or I don't want to engage with life in this way. Is there's this learned pattern through life of when something's uncomfortable, is there a way around it? And if I learn there's a way around it and it gets easier that way, tend to take that way. And so bypassing just becomes, it's built into our mechanism. It's a survival strategy, right? The reason I asked, is that something we need to engage in, is because if we look at relationships and how people repeat certain patterns in relationship, it could be codependent patterns or violent patterns or whatever have you, it's usually a result of bypassing because they haven't really been able to hone in and see what is it that they're participating in. And when they become aware of that, then that awareness itself, rather than a choice to do so, but that awareness itself organically makes the pattern shift. I've seen that happen sort of in my life too. It's not like I can say, hey, as of tomorrow, I'm not going to lose my temper. But the more I become aware of the mechanism that's causing what are the triggers and all of that, over time, that organically begins to shift into a way that I'm not as reactive in similar scenarios. So just want to get your thoughts on that.
Okay. By the way, I write down as you're talking because I have a brain like a sieve, and if I don't, it's gone forever. So just so you know what I'm doing here. What does not bypassing look like? What is that?
So for me, it's always going to be a relative thing. There's no such thing as absolutely not bypassing. It's circumstance specific, right? For example, I could say, whereas before, maybe 20 years ago, if I'm in a conversation or argument with a significant other, there's a natural defense mechanism that automatically comes up the moment I'm hearing something I don't want to hear. Whereas now, there's a much more openness to be able to hear the other point of view, even if it's something that wouldn't sit well with me, or I might feel that is an unfair statement. In that relative sense, that would be not bypassing compared to what I was doing before, for example. And there's much more chance of resolution in the second scenario than there was in the first, where the pattern just keeps repeating itself with no sort of evolution.
So I think that there are certain kinds of patterns and triggers and causes, etc., that become part of the snowflake that may never shift. And the question is, does it matter? If I think that these we can shift certain things in these everyday lives, but whatever it is that we really are, which is not Shiv and not Judy, that doesn't shift. And so it's not that I think there's anything wrong with trying to shift patterns in these human lives. I think it's a smaller goal than is necessary. I think it's possible to have a bigger goal. And I will also say that from my experience, understanding or being aware of causation, what caused this trigger in me that I get mad at my honey rather than be able to listen, which is pretty much everybody's experience when you come up against disagreement. I mean, you only have to look at Twitter or the news, or I mean, who was I telling? These days, rage is so on the surface for so many people that sometimes when I scroll through social media or other, I am astonished by how many of people's back teeth I can see in the pictures. Like the mouths are open, and it's just everybody's in a fury. And all the discussions at big holidays about how they're going to be able to stand having their family members who disagree with them there. I think that the natural inclination when we come across somebody who disagrees with us is to either argue or run. We're going to hit the block button or we're going to yell. But I don't know that looking for the cause or understanding the cause or being, and again, this is scandalous. I am aware, especially as a person with a psychology background, what I'm saying is heresy, that I don't know that there's actually value in understanding what caused it. Here it is. Here it is. Do I need to know why? I understand that most people think yes. But that's not what I have found. So bypassing is not something I worry about. If what I've seen is that as I play with people, here's a feeling, like it or not like it, whatever caused it, here it is. As it's allowed to be without dwelling and without explanation and without trying to figure out why, it pretty much generally gets bored and moves on by itself. It just disappears. I know that just sounds outrageous. But I see this over and over and over and over and over. And as the feeling runs its time out, it takes a little bit of the story of me with it. And again, things shockingly where you, if you were my client, don't even quite know what just happened, but it takes a little bit of the Shiv story with it, and there's a lightness that ends up happening without ever understanding what caused the feeling. I am aware. I'm aware of how different this sounds.
It actually doesn't sound that different for me personally, because this is exactly what my experience. I've told the story to my readers many times of me sitting on the balcony for 1 year, where I didn't allow myself to move from that seat. And I was going through all kinds of tumultuous emotions at the time. I was very sort of depressed. And I said, I'm going to sit here until I can't, right? And so from 5 to 11 p.m. every evening for a year, I sat on my balcony, no music, no books, no TV, nothing. You sit. And it wasn't like I was trying to psychoanalyze myself either. I was just allowing myself to feel those feelings, right? Because these emotions have a certain gravitas, certain momentum to them.
For sure.
And they're energy that needs to be released. It's not necessarily staying there for the heck of it. It's there
Right.
because you have never given it a chance to go. It's like a pressure cooker, waiting for someone to lift the little lid off and let the steam out. And so I 100% agree with you there, that has to be part of the process. In fact, it has to be the main focus of the process. Psychoanalyzing the emotions themselves doesn't do anything to release them. It gives you an academic understanding of why you might be feeling that way. It gives you no tools to let them go. And you're right, a big piece of who you are goes with them because the emotions are the story. Where I think you and I may be coming from a slightly different point, when you ask the question, does it matter? Right? Does it matter to who? That's the question I would ask.
Well,
because
it's a valid question in a spiritual conversation.
Right. And the mattering usually tends to happen to someone, because otherwise the matter of it doesn't even make any sense. So person to whom it matters is usually the person coming to you with a certain sense of identity. That's the person, because outside of that, when you take the impersonal me, the not Judy, the not Shiv, to that person, there is no sort of moral, nothing. There's no decision-making process. It is what it is, and one moves along. Are you saying that for yourself, there's no Judy that's part of the equation there? No personal self that has some preference, some desire, some want?
Of course not. If you call my name, I'm going to answer.
Right.
Things set me off. I have political points of view like everybody else, which, by the way, I think might be different from yours. I just possibly. I don't. When you say, does it matter to whom? We're already talking about the building of a person. When we say that it matters to the person, yes, there's a person being built. To a someone, there's a someone being built. Feelings are a major way we do that. This identity thing. Do I think any of that is real? No. And so if I live in this world just like everybody else, I have opinions, I have triggers, I have preferences, I like one kind of ice cream over another, absolutely. And also, I know none of that is what I am.
But does it matter to you? Do those preferences, those desires, those emotions that you feel, understanding that in a sense, it's a bit of a smokescreen, with that knowledge at the back of your mind, do they matter to you anyways?
Sometimes.
So my question is then, when somebody comes to you and you say that doesn't matter, does that in a way then project the impression that they shouldn't care about?
No. First of all, I would never say that to them. First, because there's no quicker way to get somebody to run the hell out of the room than to tell them their feelings don't matter. And the amount of times that I have been accused of not validating somebody's pain, this is absolutely a thing. But I don't see it as my job to validate something they don't want anyway. Wow. Why are we validating this? So again, how I do this, I have to be careful, because if I explain too much about how I do things, it no longer works. Mind is so brilliant. But I would never say to somebody, oh, your feelings don't matter. Unless it's somebody I've worked for really long time and they understand. My job is to show them so they see it for themselves. And so I'm not running around in the world going, pshaw, you're upset? Feh. I'm not going to belittle somebody who's anxious or afraid or depressed. I spent my whole life depressed. I know what that's like. But I would say that with the lightening of Judy, with the transparency-ish, I hate this language, but if the transparency, with the transparency of that heavy stuff disappeared, it's just with the loss of the self, that crap went with it. It's like an anchor or a rock. And so, yes, the question, does it matter and to whom? That to whom is not insignificant. The person gives a goddamn, absolutely. We care very much. But it's an anchor to a self we don't even like, for the most part, for most of us. So I remember, this is a million years ago, I was overeating. I was using food to cope with all kinds of stuff. And I was trying to figure it out. And I remember standing in the shower thinking, what am I doing? It's like I am trying to gain weight. And I suddenly saw those words literally, that I was trying to gain solidity. I was trying to gain weight. I was trying to anchor the self. And it just really wants to float free. It doesn't want to be held down.
Well, it's interesting because, there's, I think within the spiritual industry itself, there's these two extremes that are at work at all times. One is absolutely, well, not so much New Age spirituality, but more the older traditions, absolutely trying to validate the person as the sufferer, as the one who needs enlightenment, all of that.
Right.
And there's the other side that comes from the perspective of there's no person here.
Right.
The way I approach things is really, there's 50 shades of a person. And some people come with very dense senses of self. They're the ones who are most suffering because
absolutely,
they're hooked in with a million hooks into that sense of identity.
Right.
And then there are people with very fluid senses of identity because in a lot of ways, a lot of these hooks have been detached, especially to those aspects of them that make them suffer deeply. I am of the mindset that there are no people that actually occupy any of those two extremes. There's no person with a completely identified sense of person, and there's no person who's a complete non-person. There's sort of shades in between. And if I think about my own experience, there's so much that I've left behind in terms of identifying with, very similar to yourself. You were overeating, I was drinking, I was doing drugs, I was suicidal ideation, lots of, I was writing poetry because I was so angsty. But now there are parts of my life that I do, and I know they're not 100% real. I know my identity as a father is just a role I play, but I relish it. I enjoy it because I know this is that age where my kids are going to look up to me and they're like, Dad, you know everything. 4 years from now, my teenage daughter is going to be like, you're a loser. You don't understand anything, right? That
so
shit's going to
uncool.
come, that fall from grace is going to happen. But I enjoy it. And why not? Why not enjoy that process of manifesting as a person?
These folks that want to lose the self and only be whatever that is. It's a flip version of it's a narrow point of view. It's consciousness or existence or God or infinity or the universe or whatever we call it, source, awareness, whatever we name it. It likes it all. If you've ever had a pet that gave birth, that animal, I had a cat years ago that had kittens. You have to teach that mother cat to be a mother or to enjoy being a mother or to love her kittens, or she didn't have to sit around there thinking about, am I identifying as a mother? She just lived her little life. Why isn't that good enough for us? Why can't we be it all, have it all? Why can't we experience pain and laughter and boredom and itchiness? And why can't we relish parenthood the way the mother cat did? And also experience a little bit of what is not the mother cat, what is not the father. Why can't we be all of that? Why is it one or the other? And go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to offer my answer to your question. I thought you were asking me, but well, the mother cat doesn't have the powers of abstraction. It's kind of like a death ray. You turn it on, but you can't really sort of regulate it.
Right.
Once you turn it on, this thing is just blasting through all of
Right.
reality. And so our powers of abstraction have allowed us to develop as a civilized society. And part of that is it also has helped us develop narratives about what is going on. And that narrative is always in conflict with what is going on.
Right.
And we can't seem to make up our minds which one the real reality is. It's kind of like being on morphine.
We don't have to
Can't
choose.
tell.
Right. Right. It's true we can't tell. We're not big enough to tell. We're too big. We're in the diorama. We're in the play. We can't watch. We're not watching the play. And I know that there's a lot of talk about being the witness, but we're being the witness of being the witness. It's a never-ending. We can't be what we're not, and we can't see it either. And so, these folks that think they have to retreat to a cave in order to experience, to narrow their lives, as if consciousness doesn't include fatherhood also. That's just weird to me. It's not either or. And there's such a freedom in knowing both are possible simultaneously. You're muted still.
Thanks for that.
You're much better at this than I am.
I can't figure out the mute button after 40 years of being alive on this planet. For me, there's a very simple benchmark that I use, which is if it's happening, that means it's meant to happen. And I can't fight it. I can't argue with reality. What I can do is develop my own strategies about what I can do next, but I can't argue with reality. And every strategy is going to be just that, a strategy, not the truth, not the best option. It's what this little piece of meat between my ears can come up with in this moment. And so that's what I will typically draw people's attention to is you can argue with me all you want, but you can't argue with this. Or you can try, but it's like bashing your head against a wall, right?
Knock yourself out.
Yeah. And many people will. Like the human endeavor is knocking yourself out.
Right.
When beating yourself up against reality.
You know, we started before the mic was on, before the recording was on, we were talking about that I just bought a house and that even though the house is now bought, I am still trying to figure out if I did the right thing and if it's the right house and maybe I made a mistake and etc. And so the mind is just very busy figuring things out. And meanwhile, action is taken, life proceeds, it does what it wants. And so I would just say, though, that when we do try and figure things out, we do think about things, and we do identify as Shiv and Judy, and this is what humans do. We make decisions, we try and understand causes, we try to navigate and manage feelings, yes. We try to get enlightened, we try to meditate and make our actions create enlightenment, fine. At the point that it hurts, we're believing a wrong story. At that point, there's too many anvils in the weight of the self. There's too much selfing happening. At the point that it hurts, it's not that there's anything wrong with hurting. It's not that hurting isn't also included in consciousness, in existence. It's all valued and valuable. It's not much fun. And if hurting is happening, there's selfing going on. And
it's an interesting balance to strike, isn't it? It's not very easy for a lot of people to do that.
No.
It has to be all or nothing for them.
Yes.
Either I don't want to be attached to any, not even the littlest preference. That's not me. Get away from me. Total renunciation, go sit in the cave.
Right.
Or, oh my God, look at all the problems I have in the world. But that ability to separate, just like Judy does when she's moving houses, to say, hey, some anxiety is going to happen, some worrying, but that's going to happen. I'm still going to have my space outside of that. Maintaining the space outside of the person
Right.
without completely devaluing the person. That's a balance that's not
It's
communicated
tricky.
very often.
No, people don't know how, and they certainly don't know how to do that on their own or recognize that that's even happening, which is how I see my role, which is a story, but it's how I see my part in it to help them see for themselves. And so that's the one thing I would say about feelings, is that they can be a pointer. If they're too intense, there's too much identity, there's too much responsibility, fault, blame, me. There's too much me going on. And that's very difficult to do by yourself at first, for sure. And I just also want to say that, while I am playing with the house thing, did I do the right thing? And don't I want to go back to California? I mean, man, there must be a way I can go back to California while I own now a house in Pennsylvania. It's craziness. I'm not anxious about it. It's just almost this funny little game where I watch the mind busy itself with nonsense. And I think that there's come to be a trust in the non-Judy, in consciousness. Again, I hate putting names on these things. I don't see any value in putting names on it, but there's a trust that it knows more than I do. It's running the show anyway. If it wants me to buy a house, I'm buying a house, and houses get bought, action gets taken. There's a trust in that. And so there's no anxiety about it, because I know it's being taken care of, which is very comforting, really. In the past, it would have made me, well, in the past, I either would have been terribly, terribly scared, or I'd have been paralyzed. Because if I think that if I have to figure it out before I take action, I'm kind of not ever going to take action.
So let's switch a little bit to that past that you're talking about, because I know that you've had some background. I think with the Byron Katie workshops, and
I started with Byron
Scott
Katie.
Kiloby's workshops,
Right.
and so give us a little bit of background. What got you into that, and then what got you out of that?
Okay. I stumbled on, I had a lifetime, like everybody else who is anxious and depressed. Everybody has a similar story in this regard. Everybody has tried a whole lot of things. They've tried therapy, they've tried meditation, they've tried medication, they've tried satsangs, retreats, podcasts, books. People have tried a whole lot of stuff. I had tried everything but the spiritual route because I had no interest. In fact, I had many years, I had a very long-term relationship with a lovely human being with whom I'm still great friends. I love him to pieces. He was, as not unusual in California, he was a very spiritual guy. He would talk about the spiritual stuff, and I would make fun of him. That was our relationship. And so, well, one night in the middle of the usual suicidal depression, it was like 3 a.m, and I had my radio on while I was, this how long ago it was, my friends, long before the internet. I was lying in bed, the radio was on, it was 3 a.m, and there was some talk show, and the guest of whatever show it was said, "It's like Byron Katie. She used to be depressed and now she's not." And I thought, what? And I turned the light on and wrote that odd name down. And in the morning, I looked up, it can't have been that long ago because I did Google it. I looked her up. And I didn't know what the hell was happening on all those videos. but something was happening for those people and I wanted it. 3 weeks from then, there was one of her schools in my neighborhood. It was 15 minutes away. I didn't know that she did 3 of those a year at the time. I didn't know anything about her. I hadn't read her books. I knew nothing. But again, just like I bought a house, one foot walked in front of the other. I put that school, which was $5,000, on a credit card because I did not have the money. And I went. And my ex was like, are you in a cult? What's happening? So for a long time, it worked for me. The Byron Katie approach worked for me. The plain English of it worked for me. The psychologicalness of it worked for me, that being my background. It worked for me. And I would say that it definitely changed Judy's life. The experience of Judy was changed by that whole thing. I don't want to get too much into what happened there, but I came to see that she had nothing I didn't have, basically. And that there was I want to pick my words really carefully. There was an intentional attempt to make me think she did have something that I didn't have. And it was a very difficult time in my life to discover that she was just like the rest of us, and that she did believe her thoughts, and that I mean, I just couldn't. I plummeted so low, and I lost all my friends, and I lost my income because I was facilitating her stuff. That was what I was doing. My friends, when I say I lost them, I literally had more than one person say, I'm afraid to be seen talking to you. That literally, like, that's the kind of culture where, you know, everybody was kissing ass and didn't want to be seen not kissing ass. Okay, so I was kind of in despair and felt that I needed some help. And so I ended up moving to Scott Killaby, and it was a similar realization at some point that there was nothing here I didn't already have. And that was the end of that. So that was both situations painful. The Byron Katie, terribly painful. By Scott, I had already had practice at this. And I'm not blaming either of them, but this was my experience of it. And both situations really set me free to find the Judy way. So both in their way, extremely liberating, as painful as they were.
That's so interesting, because you hear of, you know, similar dynamic play out in Zen sanghas and Indian ashrams and these, you know, self-help type seminars. It's the same pattern, but the thing is, there is something of value being offered, because that's what brings people in, and you feel it initially. Yes. Otherwise you wouldn't be invested.
Right.
So, and you know what, you see the same dynamic in families. Even I've seen dynamics where parents will try to maintain that power over their children,
right,
well past the age of 30 and 40, where
right,
dad and mom still know better, and the kids never really mature past being
right,
a certain, you know. And it's that realization. You would imagine that any teacher or facilitator worth their salt would want their students to have that realization, where they realize, hey, my teacher is actually the same as I am, and say, well, thanks a lot for the good times, and see you later. And yet that doesn't happen. So why
isn't that odd?
Yeah. So what do you think is at the root of that? I mean, obviously you and I, I'm sure, have some similar opinions there, but I'd like to hear.
I think it's power and money, and it's identity, because guess what? Just like everybody else, they have a story of who they are. It's self-story. They like the self-story of me, the one who helps people, the one who teaches people, the one who has something to spread around to the world. Oh, they like that. That's an identity. Fine. I think there's a certain amount of threat to that identity if people fly too free. I remember being shocked at how many of her best people Byron Katie was losing at various times. And I thought, does she not see this? Does she not want to keep them? And to her credit, maybe she didn't. I don't know. I'm not in her head. Maybe there was a part of her that was like, okay, hit it. Here, little bird. Maybe. But you do have to wonder, it is a common story for people in the spiritual world to have a bitter, angry, painful story of how they left whatever teacher they followed. I can think of a few people that I don't know personally that I see on Facebook all the time. And there's always, whenever there's an opportunity for them to say, yeah, that's happened to me with that teacher, they burned me bad. And they're still angry all these years later, and they're still hurt all these years later. I don't know how much flying is going on there. Because after a while, carrying around that pain is a different kind of selfing. It's a different kind of identity story. I'm the one that was ripped off by, or fooled by, or, excuse my French, but fucked by XYZ. I think there are people still carrying those stories around. Not their fault, but there's still selfing going on. It is a contradiction to think that anyone can lose that sense of self via another person's anything. How does that work?
And what I think is a particular irony in this case, I mean, we see these power and control hierarchies in every industry, but this is the industry in which they're advising you against the pitfalls of that. Right. That's their main job, is don't fall prey to this egotistical need to control your life. And that's all not true. That's not the real self. And yet that's exactly what is being facilitated. That's why it becomes so much more glaring in this case, in this industry, more than any others. But I think you're right, is some of that, the stories we hear coming out of that, there is also a culture of victimization that follows in that. And, I had my first podcast with Joan Tollefson, and, she has plenty of examples to the contrary of where, she herself left her teacher, Tony Packer, and was wished well by Tony, said, well, go forth and have a great life, kind of thing. So, it's
Glad
great to hear
it.
stories. Yeah, it's great to hear stories like that. Like that is a bit of a, antidote for the cynicism I've cultivated over the years. But the fact remains, like, this industry has a terrible track record, a really bad rap when it comes to this kind of stuff.
A couple of years ago, I was working with a client, who I think got a crush on me. I mean, he never said as much, but that's what it appeared. And he was trying to adore me. And all of the emails and all of the contact was adoring, and all of the wording was adoring. And he was trying to revere me, and he was trying to put me on a pedestal. And I wanted none of it. Don't put me up there. Then I have to stay there. Then I have to figure out how to, no, I'm not interested. And when I told him this, it was shocking, only because all these teachers should be saying that. Don't idealize me. Don't turn me into something I'm not. Don't make me into a story. No. Who does that serve? Nobody. And to me, it ought to be a common conversation that Mooji says, don't kiss my feet. Why doesn't Mooji say, don't, I love you, that's lovely that you want to kiss my feet. Don't kiss my feet. Why doesn't Mooji say that?
Maybe his feet just really need to be kissed every day. I'm not sure what his motivation there is.
I mean, but you know what I'm saying. It's like,
Yes, absolutely.
why allow this? Who does it serve?
Well, and that's where, I come back to, I don't know if it's a conscious choice being made. In some cases, they're pure con artists who
Right.
that's what drives them. I'd love to con people. Great. I don't think that's the majority. I think the majority are actually people with deep-seated inferiority complexes that then need that stuff projected upon themselves. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
They're not able to.
They love me.
Yeah. They're
Yeah.
not able to react like Judy does or as Shiv does to that kind of attention. I mean, that gives me the heebie-jeebies, to be honest
Yeah,
with you. I
me
had
too.
this one lady stalking me for the longest time. She would send me donations to my PayPal of hundreds of dollars, and I literally would return them
Right.
one after the other.
Right.
Like, I don't want your money. The moment I
Right.
take your money, I'm validating this is okay. I do not want your money. But in order to react like that, you need to be psychologically already somewhat secure in yourself to not want that adoration. And I feel
Right.
like some of
And
these
not to
people
feed
crave
on it.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, you and I first, I think, started talking about or in relation to somebody that we both perceived as needing that a lot, needing the constant, aren't you wonderful stuff. And they're human too. I get it. I just see it as a contradiction to the spiritual message. I see it as a conflict in the sense that, yes, on the one hand, they're saying, this is not what you are, and this is not what I am. And, at the same time, tell me you love me. I don't want to be a part of that. And I don't know that it serves anybody, not the person being loved and not the person doing the loving. So yeah, it's a kooky. I think it was you. I'm pretty sure it was you, Shiv, who wrote a while back about how you were invited to be at, I think it was Sand, maybe, and you were on a panel. And you stop me if this wasn't you. I don't know. It all blends in my head.
Yes, it was at San. I wasn't on a panel. I was invited to speak, sort of like a
Okay.
solo. Yeah.
So at some point there was a conversation. Again, if I mangle this, I apologize. This is how this story is stuck in my head. And at some point you were having a conversation with these other folks who were either on panels or speaking or whatever, and they were talking about the circuit. Was that you? They were
Yes.
talking about the spiritual circuit. Well, I was like, there's a spiritual circuit. What's that
And
about?
that's exactly what it is. It is a circuit. There are events that people go to. They all get invited to the same events, the same seminars. It's a trade show, like any industry. And it has to be, otherwise it could not generate the kind of revenue it does.
That's
So you
in the
need
end.
that business model to be set up. And I have no problem with that if that's what they called it from the get-go.
Yes.
But as I make the point in my writings is, a teacher needs to care about turnover. If their students are really learning the lesson, they should be flying out of the door as fast as they come in.
Absolutely.
But in a business model, you have consumers, and consumers you want to keep. You don't want them to leave.
Right.
So which is it? Are you teaching or are you making people consume? They're two different things.
Right. And trade show is a great expression. It's an honest expression, and it includes the word show. And it's, let's call it what it is. This is an act. This is a show. I don't mean by that it's, evilly conniving. I know there are some, but I agree with you. I don't think that most of them are, who can I rob today? I don't think that's what's happening. But the show, let's call it what it is. We are all pretending here. Whether you are a ditch digger or a panelist at Sand, it's a show. And to make people think or to feed into people's hope that there's something special that can be gotten from this show, as opposed to the ditch digging show, ends up eventually, in my opinion, being cruel. It gives them the opposite of what they're searching for. And that hurts.
Yeah, and part of the problem is that cruelty has been built into the system. So it's become systemic. So no one person is willing to take responsibility because it's kind of like, well, that's what everybody does. And that's the lineage. And isn't that what we're supposed to do? And
right.
We're all playing this part and that's just our job. But it takes a certain amount of awareness to see, hold on a second, just because they've been doing this for centuries doesn't mean it's right.
Right.
and
or
then,
helpful.
Or helpful. At the end of the day, if this is really about, increasing a person's understanding or awareness or whatever it is, or liberating them, whatever it is you're selling them, if it's clear to you that that's not what's happening, isn't it time to get a little bit honest with yourself?
Time to check yourself, not them.
Right, yourself.
Because so often, I knew that's what you meant. It's so often I've seen these teachers blame the student, blame the client. They're resisting. The teacher will say, dude, that may be, but first of all, existence includes resistance too. And second of all, whose job is it to help them get past that? It's not theirs. They don't know how. What are you teaching them if you can't get them past that? So, I mean, it's a myth-filled, convoluted, self-serving show. And I like entertainment as much as the next guy, but people hinge their whole lives on these things, and it becomes painful after a while. And they wonder what's wrong. Again, it's just one more reason to believe there's something wrong with themselves, that other people are getting it and they're not. That's not, I mean.
Well, one of my readers has made this point to me in the past, and it's a fair point, is even if all these teachers suddenly woke up to what they were doing and they're, oh, we got to stop this. We can't keep exploiting people like this. He says, do you think people are not going to go somewhere else to want to be exploited? That's part of it as well. There's a demand and supply. You can't exploit people who aren't wanting to be exploited. So if it's not New Age spirituality, it'll be some form of religion. It'll be some form of consumerism. I mean, if we look around,
ayahuasca,
there's exploitation happening everywhere. Like when we watch Netflix, my subscription just went up to $20 a month.
It's an outrage.
It used to be $9.99. And I just know that I'm still going to pay it because I need my Netflix. I'm allowing myself to be exploited. And that's, we all have a certain level of exploitation we're willing to, allow happen.
And again, what's the alternative? What are you going to do without Netflix, right? What's especially with children? I mean, what's the alternative for people who are hurting, who want something and don't know how to get it? I mean, so I agree with you that they're just going to go from one. The thing is, though, that it's currently cool for teachers to say, I'm not a teacher. I don't follow teachers while teaching. And it's just kind of layer on layer on layer of nonsense, which is actually business as usual for us humans and for the mind. That's what it does, whether it's talking about the job or whether it's talking about enlightenment. It's kind of the same. So it's kind of how it is. And again, only if it's terribly painful. I mean, money has to go somewhere. It can't sit still. It has to move. So if it goes to a teacher's pocket, fine. At the point that it becomes terribly, terribly painful, I'd love people to see that there's identity and selfing going on and give themselves a break. Who was it? Wasn't it Bentinho? I know there are others as well who had a suicide because the guy just couldn't get it. This was somewhere in the last couple of years.
I'm not sure, but there have been quite a few cases of this happening.
I can't get it. There's definitely something wrong with me. Other people get it. I mean, at the point that you start thinking about killing yourself because of this, it's time for something different. I mean, yikes.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you made about even, the people who are playing the opposite role of, don't come to me, I have no answers. Good case in point of that is Yuji Krishnamurti, who I like a lot of what he says. Like a lot of people have wisdom to offer that makes sense, but it doesn't really go very much beyond that for me. Like, oh, these are nice words, something to ponder. That's about it.
That's all they can be, though.
Yeah, and whereas a guy like Yuji, who plays the total anti-guru, was still surrounded by people day in and day out, and people will still read his books and call him the real deal, as if
Right.
there's such a thing as a real deal.
Exactly.
Right? And this is my thing is, when I talk to people, and I don't talk in any capacity of advising, it's more sort of a back and forth interaction. It's the only real deal here is what's going on around. And even that is questionable, but it's as much as you're going to be able to grasp with reality. That's the real deal. Person, no, you have no way of gauging.
Right. So no human is the real deal. No story is the real deal. No offering is the real deal. No myth of something unattainable attainable is the real deal. We love our stories and we love our dreams, and there's nothing wrong with them. We pay money to Netflix for stories. We like it. Let's just call it what it is. It's a show. We are enjoying it. At the point that it hurts, and it's not necessary to do something else, but it might be kinder.
Well, the beauty of Netflix is the willing suspension of disbelief. We are willingly saying, for the next 2 hours, I'm going to believe whatever crap comes up on the screen, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy the process of it. If we could approach spirituality in the same way,
yes,
no problems.
Right.
But we're not suspending disbelief. We're actually believing, and that's
we're buying in. You're absolutely right, and that's the cruelty of it. Because while they're telling you to don't believe, you're believing. And what's the alternative? The only alternative is to be honest. It's a show. We like shows, and that's all. Willing suspension of disbelief. I mean, I love it. We give them our money to read a book, to read fiction, to watch a movie, to see a play. We love it. Let's call it what it is. So there is no real deal. I think I've written a tickler or two about that, probably several. And as usual, pissed people off. It's very funny. Every week I write my tickler. I do it every week. I've been doing it for, I want to say 6 years now. I think it's since 2016. 2016, I mean. So there's a lot of them. And I can always tell when I've touched a little bit of heresy, because the unsubscribes go up that week. So people in their fury, fuck this bitch, unsubscribe. And that's one of the things that irritates people, this idea that this is a show and so is spirituality, and fine until it hurts.
Well, I have this word that I call it enlightenment, kind of like, and it's enlightenment entertainment. That's what it is.
I like that.
And the best you can get out of that industry is some perspectives by which you can approach situations differently. Try it out. Read a bit of Epictetus. See if what he says works out. If it works out, great. Doesn't work out, move on. Figure something else out for yourself. But this idea of the real deal, exactly what you said. Most people can't deal with the idea that there may not be a real deal.
I know it's
puts too much burden of responsibility on themselves.
It's myth busting, and it's terrifying. Because if that's the case, then what?
Then what
That
is the
means
question?
that, right? Then what? Then I have to live with this as it is? Oh, hell. I don't like this as it is. This sucks. So, I mean, it's all designed to avoid the present, change the present. I mean, even just the concept of transformation. How does what is transform? Only the person can do that. What is doesn't transform. It is what it is. It stays what it is. So it's just myth laden and crazy making, honestly, in so many ways. And the fun of it is if you can see the lightness of it, if you can laugh at it, if you can enjoy the show, great. If you can enjoy the tears and the fear, I mean, people pay money to get scared out of their wits at amusement parks. Great, be scared. That's what I mean by enjoy it. I don't mean never be scared. But I just, and it's not even that there's anything wrong with suicide. I would just, my personal preference is that nobody runs off and kills himself because they haven't attained some enlightened dream. That's just me.
Yeah, I mean, there's very, very small minority of people that commit suicide for rational reasons. It's typically something, some misunderstanding, and that's the tragedy of it. Is not the act itself, but
Right.
the motivation driving that act is
Right.
typically something that was a huge misunderstanding,
Right.
Either facilitated by a culture or facilitated by some belief system they had. And that typically,
Right.
similar
Right.
to the person that you mentioned who may have killed themselves, it is a culture that's feeding into that sense of lack. Right.
Ironically, isn't that wild when you really think about it? That it feeds into a sense of lack while telling you there is none? You know? Yeah, it's crazy making. And I think that's part of how it keeps people hooked. Because the mind loves sorting this stuff out. And there's never an end to sorting it out. I mean, that was one of the things that I came to see as I was lucky enough to have been disillusioned with Byron Katie and Scott Killaby. I consider that a blessing in my life. That there's never an end to inquiry. There's always another thought. There's always another feeling, because Killaby was all about the feelings. Byron Katie was all about the thoughts. And when I say that, I don't mean only. It's not like feelings never came up with Byron Katie. It's not like thoughts never came up, but that was their main thing. And there's always another one. It's never ending. And it's inherently, inquiry is inherently assuming that what is not okay and needs to be transformed. That's crazy. And that's yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'll often tell people is don't go searching for truth, because then you're assuming there's something concrete out there to find. Instead, try to be honest. Because the more you learn to be honest with yourself, the more truthful you will learn to be. And in the process of being truthful, the truth of the matter, whatever that is, not some absolute, but the truth
Your
of what's
version.
going on around you is going to make itself more and more apparent, because you're not deceiving yourself. You've cultivated the habit of not engaging in self-deception. You know, and I see your own transition out of Byron Katie's work and Scott Killaby's, as opposed to your peers who remained, was a willingness to be honest with yourself.
It's so tricky, though. I appreciate that. It does get tricky though, because I thought, for instance, that I had been honest with myself my whole life, but my version of honest with myself, and it's not, it wasn't unusual, is what did I do wrong? Let's fess up. Let's admit what a screw up I am, what a terrible person I am. Don't run from this, Judy. Let's face it. You're bad. That was my version of honesty.
And maybe that version of honesty was appropriate to that version of Judy. And maybe
it was what I knew.
Evolves, right? I mean, could that version of Judy have done it differently? If you
Absolutely not. I mean, it's like buying a house in Pennsylvania. I had nothing to say about it. It's just, yeah. So that was the snowflake. And could I have done anything different? Of course not. If I could have, I would have. But you can also see how that kind of thinking would make a girl suicidal. You know, if I'm inherently bad and I think that's being honest, well, then we got to kill this thing. What are we doing even letting it be? So it's very hard to get out of that stuff by yourself, because the mind is brilliant and it doesn't really want to. It likes this game.
I mean, if I reflect back, I was in the very same position. Something wrong with me deeply. And that thing has to be gotten rid of. If that requires the physical form to go, then get rid of it.
It's the logical fix.
It is. And it's amazing how rational your own suicidal ideation can become after a point, to the point where it's like as obvious as this is a piece of, this is a red card, this is a blue card. Like, it's that obvious to you. The thing I realized reflecting back is, if I hadn't gone through that, I couldn't have come out of it. There's no way to circumvent that process. And it may just be some people manage to get out and some people don't. I'm not entirely sure. But is it preventable by any form of intervention or advice, in your opinion?
Advice, no. I have found that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, it is possible to trick the mind. It needs to be tricked. If it isn't tricked, nothing intervenes. But it's possible to give the mind busy work, much like my stewing about if I bought the right house. That's busy work for the mind. It's very busy figuring this out. I'm perfectly happy to have it sit around trying to determine whether I should have bought a house with steps or not, considering that I have a bum foot, right? Fine. You go off and think about that. I think it's possible to trick the mind so that the grown-ups can talk. But it's sometimes astonishingly easy, and sometimes it's not.
So would that be something akin to distracting the mind? Because if I reflect back again to my long period of depression, my family was constantly, oh, don't lie in bed, busy yourself with something,
Right.
That was their sort of solution. And I intuitively sense that if I do that, I'm just delaying the inevitable. I'm going to have to face up to whatever this is eventually.
Here's the thing. I mean, everybody, even in this culture too, in the Western culture, it's people who are depressed or anxious get the same exact advice to this day. Get busy, get a project, get a hobby, exercise, eat right, get fresh air. That'll fix it. The thing is, you take your mind with you. You go out for a run. Where do you think? You think you leave your mind at home in bed? No, it comes with you. And the whole time you're running, so is thought. So I don't mean that that you distract Shiv. I mean that you give thought something to think about. And while it's busy trying to solve some silly problem, like, do I buy a house with steps? it's possible, again, I'm being careful not to say too much, but it's possible for the whole house of cards to tumble when the mind is busy with a project. What you do with your body, are you out there running? Are you watching TV? Are you solving jigsaw puzzles? Irrelevant.
Well, and that's actually very akin to the creative process. And I can see the paintings behind that. I'm assuming you have had some hand in creating. And part of the creative process in finding solutions is exactly that. As long as you're hyper-focused on a problem, there's no solution that's going to appear. The moment your mind is elsewhere, that's when the creative aspect of your brain can actually start gleaning what those solutions might be. And the self is no different.
I think it's not coincidence that so many artists, writers, poets appear to have experienced what some of us would call enlightenment. It's not a coincidence. Somebody told me, I haven't read it or seen it yet, but somebody told me there's a book called Shakespeare the Advitant. Have you ever heard of that?
Never have, but it sounds
Shakespeare
like
is full of indications that he got it. All the world's a stage. And we, the players, right? He knew. Whitman, Rilke, so many writers and poets, because creative people, their mind, thought is busy with a project. Do I want to use pink or purple here? Do I want to make a straight line or a round line? It's a project for the mind. And while that is happening, something else can paint. Something else can write. I talked at length about this a little bit with Walter Driscoll, somewhere in the last month or two, about how I know it looks like I'm the painter of all this stuff all over everywhere. It looks like I'm the one painting, but I am not the one painting. In fact, if it was up to Judy to paint, there'd be nothing on the walls. Because I, again, would be paralyzed. Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, but.
No, and you're absolutely right. I've said the same thing to my readers, because I've written something like 600 plus essays on my Vitaholics page, and they'll ask, how can you keep writing like that? I can't even get back at university. Writing a 2,500 word essay was just the most excruciating and painful thing to do. And I tell them, if I was writing it, probably wouldn't even written 50. But when I sit down, something takes over and I'm watching the process happen. I don't even know what I'm writing about. There's no plan.
Totally with you.
It's like a channeling experience almost.
Well, it is. That, I mean, I have the same experience writing the Mind Tickler. I know it has my name on it, but I don't write them. I am being written. And that is absolutely clear. It's also really clear when Judy thinks she's writing it, because it sucks. So if anything gets written at all. So I don't think it's a coincidence that artists and creative people, so many, have had this experience. And that is a good example of giving the mind a project. Here, go figure out what word to use. Go get your thesaurus and figure this out. Go on. While something else comes through and writes the piece. That's not dissimilar to what I do in sessions.
That is actually quite similar to the Zen approach of the koan, which people thought they actually had to sit and analyze it. Whereas the Zen master knew, I've given you a nonsensical riddle, go occupy yourself until you're so fed up that maybe some inkling of inspiration might occur to you. Right?
Exactly. And that's really another example of God knows how many, where the self can't do it, can't solve it, can't get things done, can't live a good life, it can't do it. We feel that we are not this. We feel it. And whether it's making us depressed or anxious or this sense of not enough, we feel it at some level of intensity. And we just want to access what we have a sense is more true. And I get that that's the appeal of spirituality, and people just don't know how. So I'm not saying I know how either. I am able to help some people get the mind busy with nonsense. Go ahead, figure this out.
And I've come to sort of that point in my life where I realize that if I try to control circumstances, the best I can hope for is a life in which everything that I want to happen happens.
Good
and
luck.
I can't imagine a more boring life to live. I can't. What do you mean? Nothing spontaneous, nothing surprising, nothing
Only
unexpected
happy.
ever happens? Only what but society has geared us to literally
yes.
plan our lives out that way. Try your level best to make what you want to happen, whether that's enlightenment or great wealth. It doesn't matter what the ultimate goal is. But if you apply yourself, you can control the outcomes. And this realization that A, you can't control the outcomes, really you can't. But B, you don't want to control the outcomes
No.
because there's no creative spark in that.
It's the source of so much misery. You know, you might be surprised, I don't know if you would be or not. There's a vast number of people tortured and hating themselves because they don't keep a clean house. I swear to God, you know, where they're in sessions paying somebody to help them, get them to do the dishes or do the laundry or fold the laundry or dust. My God, I had a client for a while who would easily go into tears and spasms of self-hate. Why can't I get off the couch and just dust? But this idea that we are supposed to control it all and that we're supposed to get what we want and we're supposed to make it happen, talk about terrifying. Oh crap, it's up to me? I don't know how. So you've got people all over the world absolutely paralyzed by the inability to make things happen. And sometimes all it takes is seeing that it's not their job. Things happen without us. And it is such a relief for the self to see that it's not up to us to carry these things. I mean, my gosh, dirty dishes. Oh no.
Well, and that's the thing is, even if you get those dishes clean, guess what? Tomorrow you're going to have dirty dishes. So they're setting themselves up for failure.
And pain.
And then they feel like failures, obviously, because they've failed, because they're inevitably going to, no matter how efficient they are. It's literally like the story of Sisyphus pushing up that rock up the mountain. It's designed to come back down. And if you don't understand that, you're going to feel like you've let the ball drop.
And it gets heavier and heavier until they can't move, until the self-hatred is strong and the blame and it's just the idea of responsibility and doership and fault. They're heavy. They're heavy. And they all feed the sense of self. I'm in charge of this. But it feels awful. So that's an example, I think, of where I would not dwell on what they feel like. Because it just doesn't matter. That's not, the feelings are not the problem there.
So would you say the absence of feelings could also be a problem in that sense. You mentioned earlier that sometimes emotions can be pointers, that they're not ultimately important, but they can be pointers. Do you feel that some people, when they feel an emotional numbness, a lot of people will misconstrue that, oh, I'm awakened, I'm enlightened, I don't feel anything. They've formed a sort of internal barrier to feeling anything, like a lack of sensitivity altogether.
It's still a way of selfing. It's still a way of defining me. I am the one who is enlightened and calm and feeling nothing but bliss. It's a definition of self. And that's the potential pain in it. The potential, it's actually the opposite of what these folks want. That numb feeling. I will say that it's far more common, at least for the people that come to me, that people have much more feeling than they want, than that people are numb. It's vastly more common. The people that experience themselves as numb, they don't like it as a rule. They still think there's something wrong with them. Sorry. I have to set an alarm every night or several times a day, actually, because my cat, who's old and sick, gets pills.
Okay.
And I will completely forget if I don't have reminders built in. So that may go off again. Apologies.
As long as you don't develop an identity as if you're failing your cat as a result of it. Very good.
I wouldn't be able to live with that one. I wouldn't, that's an identity I would not be able to stand. Anyway, I don't experience that people who feel numbness feel good about it, but it's just another way to define themselves as there's something wrong with me. It's just, I feel too much, there's something wrong with me. I don't feel enough, there's something wrong with me. They end up in the same place either way. And the self is defined, and the self draws, the self story of self, it draws focus, and we miss a hell of a lot.
And there's something wrong with me is the problem, not the emotion, not the lack of emotion, but there's something wrong with me. You know, my daughter's got this bedtime storybook that we read sometimes. It's about a little girl named Tamia. And she says, my name is Tamia. And she talks to different creatures along the way, some that are huge and gigantic, some that are tiny and microscopic. And she keeps asking them, am I small? And depending on the size of this creature, they'll be like, what do you mean
you're
small?
huge.
You're gigantic. Or another one will be, you're microscopic. And so she goes through this whole process and she goes, hey, if I can be microscopic and gigantic at the same time, that means I'm everything, including just right. Including just right. So
I love that. I love that the words are right there. And I literally have goosebumps right now because I am hearing that as I am variable. Yes. I am variable based on context. This is a big deal to understand that, because then that sense of who I am is not stone-like.
It's purely contextual.
Yes, I love that. What a beautiful thing. What's the name of the book?
Am I Small? I think it's called. I'll have to look up the author again.
I'll find it.
It's a bilingual Japanese and English book, so it might be a Japanese author that wrote that.
Okay, I'll find it. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's such a simple lesson, because what it's not doing is saying, oh, you're not small or you're not big. It's not, for lack of a better word, unvalidating all these sort of comparisons. All it's saying is, compared to, contextually speaking, you can be anything. That's all we got. But at the root of it, you are who you are. You're just right. And you can be all of that at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. You don't have to try and side with this ideology over that. Just be who you are, and it's fine. And it's such a simple message, but somehow,
it's beautiful.
Hard to get across to the adult mind. The child mind gets it like that.
It's over for the adults. By 7, it's over. Yeah. Honestly, I have told several people this story of my ex, his grandson, or maybe even great grandson, I forget. When he was 6, his father sent him off to a Christian school. And this little 6-year-old came home from school one day and said, "Daddy, I think I'm a sinner." He found himself an identity already, which, was set really very soon thereafter. And he was crying and he was upset because nobody wants to see themselves as a sinner. Sinners are bad in that world. Yeah, by very early, we think we know who we are. And it's painful.
And I
So,
think it was Malcolm Gladwell, and in one of his books, I can't remember if it was Blink, he talks about the development of the psychology of a human being. That's that window between 0 to 7, in which pretty much who you are becomes more or less cast in stone. And after
yes,
that, it's just, you're constantly working with that, but the ability to severely modify that
yes.
becomes compromised, unless there's one of these big blowout kind of experiences where you literally go to the brink of rock bottom and something blasts some of that
Right.
conditioning out of you.
Or who knows how that even happens. I mean, I know people that had what they would call an enlightenment experience, sitting on their bed at 16 for no reason. And I'm just laughing that I use this sitting on your bed example, because that's kind of what I was on the bed when that happened to me. But I was always at rock bottom. So, but I think there are some people that have a blowout experience without any apparent cause, or who knows, it just chooses some and not others. I mean, it doesn't. So, I mean, I remember a while back being at one of the Byron Katie events, and it was led by Byron Katie's daughter. And Byron Katie wasn't there. And her daughter said, "I used to try and figure out why her? Why did she deserve this experience? She was apparently very difficult before her big experience, Byron Katie was." So she admits it herself. So her daughter is like, "Why was she given the candy? These are my words, not hers. But why was she given this great gift? She didn't deserve it. And here I am, I'm doing everything right. And I don't, it doesn't follow our rules."
And I try to make my readers understand that it doesn't matter if it's happened or not. Because honestly, to me, that's not the most significant thing in my life.
For sure.
Something that happened, I had no control over it happening or not, and definitely didn't try to make it happen. And I don't think you can try to make it happen. That's another form of,
Does
there's
not
another
appear to be.
neurotic path to go down to try to make, it's like a car accident. Yeah, some people have near-death experience in car accidents, and that completely re-networks how they see life. It
Right.
doesn't mean you want to go and try and smash your car into a
Right.
tree every day. Doesn't make sense. So this accidental happening of the awakening experience, or whatever you want to call it, is not a prerequisite to anything. And this
It's
is what
really
I try
not.
to reiterate in my writing, because then it becomes that carrot on the stick that everyone then goes chasing after, right?
It becomes the myth, it becomes the dream, it becomes a story that people chase. It's like they step into a Netflix movie and they're chasing an ending, but the thing isn't real. And it's also not satisfying. They discover it. I mean, how many teachers have to say this? Nothing changes. Nothing changes afterwards. I mean, nobody believes it, despite, Adya and Rupert and DeMello, and I mean, so many people, I'm blanking on names right now, but nothing changes and nobody believes it.
Yeah, it's like I tell people, it's like having mind-blowing sex as a virgin. Guess what happens after the sex? You pretty much go back to being whatever you were before.
Living your life.
You can't be orgasming all the time. It's like your life isn't a 24/7 orgasm. And
Right.
God, thank
Oh my
goodness for
God.
that. That would be
Oh, can you
exhausting.
imagine? Who would do the dishes if
But this
you?
is the idea. This is the idea people get hooked on to. They're like, oh, if I can just have that, then I'll be in that state. Well, why would you want to?
Right. Good luck to you. Yeah. Good luck paying your bills. Good luck raising your children. Yeah. Good luck sleeping at night. How do you do that while you're having an orgasm? I mean, yeah, it's I know that was just a metaphor, but honestly, it's a myth is a lovely thing. It's very fun. We love our unicorns. We love our fairy stories, but they're not real and they don't change life. What we are can't transform. It's already everything. What's it going to change into? It just makes no sense. So I must go pill my cat.
And I was just going to say that this is a perfect way to end this podcast, because this has been a great conversation with you. And I know you and I are going to speak again. So I want to save some of the good stuff for later. Just will let my viewers know that the next podcast is actually going to be a panel discussion with the three speakers we've had on here so far: Judy Cohen, Tom Thompson, and Joan Tolson. So very sort of excited and looking forward to the kind of conversation that come up from there, because I know all three of you bring something slightly different to the table. So I'll be more than happy just to mediate that one. So
it will be very fun. And it was so much fun to actually speak so-called face-to-face, and it was lovely, Shiv. Thank you.
Yes, it was a wonderful time for me too. So take care, Judy, and say hi to the cat.
Will do.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.